So let's go ahead and look at bowl number 1 in verse number 2. And the first went and poured out his vial upon the earth, and there fell a noisome and grievous sore upon the men which had the mark of the beast, and upon them which worship his image. Now, interestingly, Jimmy, they accepted the mark of the beast, which we've been saying throughout our study, is an identification with Rome through thoughts and deeds. In other words, you line up with Rome politically, and that's where your allegiance lies. Your allegiance lies with Rome in both the way you think and the way that you act. Thoughts and deeds, right hand, forehead. We've already explained that, so I won't take the time. But isn't it interesting that God's going to actually give them a physical mark here? You took the mark of the beast? Okay. You like taking the mark? You like identifying? Okay, I'll give you a mark all over your body. So this is actually a way of just identifying you have taken the mark. I'm going to now put a mark on your body, this boil. Now, interestingly, I want to show people just how clean this is. This is a very clean study. We're not leaping, trying to connect dots here. This is the fulfillment of prophecy in a very straightforward way. Let's go ahead and read Deuteronomy 28. Remember, I said there's 2 places you can go that are the clear. Now, this is repeated by all the prophets, and Moses recorded it several different ways. In fact, Deuteronomy itself, the very first part of this "dut," or we say duet, means 2. And the onomy part means law. So Deuteronomy, by definition, is the law stated again or reiterated. So really, Deuteronomy is an explanation of Exodus. It's basically taking the legal briefs of Exodus and expanding them and commenting on them so you can't miss it. But the creme de la creme, the twinkle in the diamond, is Deuteronomy 28 and Leviticus 26. Leviticus 26, Deuteronomy 28. Really get those in your back pocket, because those are the ones the prophets use over and over again. Now check this out. In Deuteronomy 28 let's start in verse 27.
The Lord will smite thee with the botch of Egypt, and with the emerods, and with the scab, and with the itch, whereof thou canst not be healed.
So this is super important to our study, because this is the Mosaic covenant we're talking about. If you guys can believe this is in the Bible, in Deuteronomy 28, it's the Mosaic covenant curses of the covenantal stipulation. And you notice what Moses just did? He connected it to the 10 plagues. So he went backwards to Exodus 8 through 11, because everybody's familiar with that. Oh, there's our thumbs up, because I use my thumb. But anyway, yeah, just so happy to, thumbs up for everything we say. But Moses went backwards to the 10 plagues, something they were familiar with. And he said, remember the boils? Because that was one of the plagues. He said, that's going to happen again. Wow. But it won't be on them. It'll be on you. So here we are. The plagues are happening, but this time it's not on those that are in Egypt. It's on the new Egypt. It's on the new Sodom. It is on Israel. There's a new Moses and there's a new Exodus, but it's the same plague. So here we actually see, let's go ahead and go to verse 35, same chapter.
The Lord shall smite thee in the knees and in the legs with a sore botch that cannot be healed, from the sole of thy foot unto the top of thy head.
So we have the reiterated twice in probably the most significant chapter for the remaining of the Old Testament about legal briefs for what the attorneys we call prophets are saying. And here it's reiterated, and look at this. The very first vial goes out, and what do you have? For those that took the mark, you have boils. The connection is just, it's not even real. This isn't even really like, I mean, it is a Bible study, but I feel like this is fulfilled prophecy. This is exactly what the Lord said would happen. Mm-hmm. And just as a reminder, we can go back and look at that in Exodus chapter 9 and verses 8 through 12.
And the Lord said unto Moses and unto Aaron, take to you handfuls of ashes of the furnace, and let Moses sprinkle it toward the heaven in the sight of Pharaoh. And it shall become small dust in all the land of Egypt, and shall be a boil breaking forth with blains upon man and upon beast throughout all the land of Egypt. And they took ashes of the furnace and stood before Pharaoh. And Moses sprinkled it up toward heaven, and it became a boil breaking forth with blains upon man and upon beast. And the magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils, for the boils was upon the magicians and upon all the Egyptians. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, and he hearkened not unto them, as the Lord had spoken unto Moses.
So those that were taken the mark or the identification of Pharaoh, they were the persecutors of the covenant people, God's people, the children of Israel. Then they received boils and they weren't even able to stand before them. But now, those that are taking an identification with Rome, they were a part of the covenant people of God that have now apostatized. They've become now the persecutors of the followers of Christ, and they have then taken the place of those who were worshiping Pharaoh in the story, but now they're worshiping Rome.
Mm.
It's a very clean, very straightforward understanding of what's going on. Let's go ahead and look at bowl number 2. By the way, the first 4 bowls is what we're going to look at in this video. And the first 4 bowls are also in line with the plagues because they fall in these categories of the sky and of the ocean or sea and then of the land. You'll see that they fall in these categories.
Mm.
Verse number 3, the second bowl, or chalice, however you want to say it. And the second angel poured out his vial, that's the word bowl there, that cup that we see Jesus probably talk about, let this cup pass from me. The second angel poured out his vial upon the sea. So the first one is in verse number 2, it was upon the earth, and this one is upon the sea. And it became as blood of dead man, and of every living soul died in the sea. So again, going back to our story, we have God creating the waters. He divided the waters from the waters with the firmament, and then dry land appeared. And then we see him turn the water to blood. Why? You go back and read the story, because Pharaoh was drowning kids. They were drowning people in the Nile. This life source of Egypt was the Nile. They thrived because of the Nile. And the very blessing of God that he gave Egypt, the Nile, was their instrument they used to kill people. So God raises up Moses. Remember, and I always kind of say this to be silly as a trivia question, but I always say, at what age was Moses put in the ark? And everybody says, aha, you ain't going to trick me, it was Noah. But actually, it does say Moses went in the ark. Remember, it was an ark made of bulrushes. You remember that story? So
Yeah.
it's a trick question, there. But remember, as Moses was just a little one, his mother put him in an ark made of bulrushes, and it was Pharaoh's, one of Pharaoh's employees found Moses and hired the mom back to nurse him. So now she's getting paid to be a mom. Just an amazing story. But the point is that that Pharaoh was murdering people in the Nile, but Moses was put into an ark, picturing the same thing that happened to Noah, and he was saved out of that treachery. But and so we're talking about that Nile, God turns it to blood. It's like, you like seeing blood spilled in the Nile? Take your fill, my friend. Drink up. This is what you wanted. We've heard before. This is not a Bible thing, but I've heard before. There are 2 great tragedies in life: not getting what you want and getting what you want. That certainly fits here. That what they wanted blood in the Nile. They wanted to be in charge, and Pharaoh was ruling with an iron fist. Okay, you want blood in the Nile? Let's turn the Nile to blood. Interesting.
What were they doing? Were they sacrificing children? Were they just drowning people? What were they doing? I don't remember.
Well, there's a mixture of all that. I mean, it was horrific, it was a mixture of all that.
Hmm.
It was really a foreshadowing of what we see with Nero. I mean, Pharaoh was so disgusting that as Moses was so clearly illustrating that God is going to do this until he wins, Pharaoh still, the Bible says his heart was hardened. I mean, he's a disgusting person.
Wow.
So with all this murder, yeah, God turns then God comes to Cana, his first miracle recorded, and what does he do? He turns water into wine. Interesting. Because he says his blood is wine of the new covenant. And so the imagery here is, now we see when the second vial is poured out, we see that the sea becomes blood. And it says it's blood of a dead man upon every living soul died in the sea. In other words, you guys like to kill people? Okay. He says this in earlier passages in Matthew. Basically fill up the measure of your fathers. In fact, we might have that verse in here, maybe in another study, but fill up the measure of your fathers, he says in Matthew chapter 23. You're following the same thing your fathers did. Fill up the measure thereof, I think he says. That's the same idea here. And so the second bowl here matches the same idea of the Egyptians' plagues. Now, another thing too that I decided to not do for our video, but I would encourage people to do. I'm going to give you a reference here if people want to do this. Josephus seems to write about these, and you can read about that in Josephus's of the War. It's book 3, and you can look this up online. This wouldn't cost you anything. You could just use your favorite search engine and find Josephus's book of the War. It's book 3, and it's chapters 10.9. If people want to read that, I think it outlines exactly what we're reading here in Revelation 16.
I'll find a link, an online link, and put it in our description box so people can find it.
Very good. Very good. I appreciate that.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I was sitting here thinking, well, okay, when did the sea become as blood? Because I know this happened. I mean, that's what we're saying. This happened in AD 70, all this. So I was just wondering how the sea was a part of this. Would that have been the Mediterranean Sea because it was just right there, or would sea represent something else?
I'm glad you said that, because I need to clarify something. So remember, we are still seeing a vision. So this is not to be taken literal. This is a I like to call it this way. This is a comic book. This is a comic book rendering. This is massive hyperbole, comic book rendering of what is real. So it's not that the entire sea became like plasma, blood. What we're seeing here is that God poured out his full wrath, and this is the hyperbolic imagery of what we're seeing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what I do think that it could mean very literally. So here's the question: how does this vision, hyperbolic vision, play out in literal terminology? I think we've done this before. Let me see if I can do this off the top of my head. I haven't looked at this for a little bit, but I believe it's Psalm 18, if I'm remembering correctly. Yeah, it's Psalm 18. So if you go and look at the sister chapter of Psalm 18, which I don't remember that off the top of my head, but basically you can find it pretty easily. This is the historical account of when Saul was trying to kill David.
Right.
Yeah, I think you and I have gone over this before. Maybe it wasn't a video.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. And so basically you can go and read this. And now the reason I love this example is there are 2 genres being taught here. The one that says what actually happened would be called historical narrative. It would be like if a guy was there writing down on a piece of paper what actually happened. And so if you look at when Saul was trying to kill David, you can read about what actually happened. And it's exciting as far as, I don't want anybody to try and kill me with a sword. But
that's
then
in 2
David,
Samuel.
Oh, do you have the reference?
No, but
okay.
I remember reading about that in 1st or 2nd Samuel.
Yeah, I wish I had a cross reference here real quick. But yes, it's in 2 Samuel, but look at Psalm 18. Let me see if I can find some of these incredible the hyperbole that he's using here. He says in verse number 4, the sorrows of death compassed me. The floods of ungodly men made me afraid. The sorrows of hell compassed me about. The snares of death prevented me. In my distress I called upon the Lord, cried unto my God. He heard my voice out of his temple, and my cry became before him even into his ears. Now look at this in verse 7. Then the earth shook and trembled. The foundations also of the hills moved and were shaken because he was wroth. Now none of that is contained in the actual historical narrative. But this is poetry. He's utilizing something that's called prophetic language. It's a massive hyperbole. Look at verse 8. Then went up a smoke out of his nostrils, talking about God. Fire out of his mouth devoured. Coals were kindled by it. He bowed the heavens also and came down, and the darkness was under his feet. He rode upon a cherub and did fly. Yea, he did fly upon the wings of the wind. He made darkness his secret place. His pavilion round about him were dark waters and thick clouds in the sky. At the brightness that was before him, his thick clouds passed, hailstones and coals and fire. And the Lord also thundered in the heavens, and the highest gave his voice, hailstones and coals of fire. I mean, you can go on. It's just like when you go back and read this in 2 Samuel, it doesn't say any of that. And none of that is in there. What David is doing is David is utilizing poetry, and he's making it into prophetic language about his experience of when Saul was trying to come and kill him. So I love that example because it shows us the difference of genre. If you go try to find all of that in 2 Samuel, you're not going to find it. 2 Samuel is actually what happened in reality. 2 Samuel is what we would call historical narrative. This is poetry. Okay, it's prophetic language. And that's what we're reading in Revelation 16. This is prophetic language. It's hyperbolic in that same sense. So yes, I'm glad you said this so we could talk about it. If we were to look for this literally fulfilled in Josephus, we're not going to find it. Josephus is going to write in historical narrative. This is talking about prophetic language. So there's going to be a parallel, but Josephus is not going to say, and the Mediterranean was turned to blood.
I will say this though: there's a majority of the Josephus writings that does sound literally taken straight out of the Bible.
You're not wrong. And actually, I mean, I'm tempted to just look this up real quick. But yeah, I just encourage people to look at what I just said, and read what Josephus did say, because like you said, it is pretty strikingly similar.
And we're not,
it's pretty important.
And we're not using Josephus to harmonize Scripture.
We're not. Nope. No. We got our conclusion from Scripture, and it so happens to be that Josephus corroborates our conclusion. Yes. And we're doing a Bible study here. Yeah, Josephus' War of the War, Book 3, chapters 10.9, if you want to read about that. All right?
If you like this video, hit that like and subscribe button, and check out the full episode by clicking the link below.